2025 is here, and the pace of change has never been faster. Are you ready to thrive in a world where AI accelerates everything, but can't replace the most essential human skills? That's why we've created a special 11-part series on the Learnit podcast to help you master the skills needed to future-proof yourself and your career. From self-awareness to listening and developing trust, these are the traits that will make you irreplaceable in an ever-evolving workforce. I'm Damon Lemby, CEO of Learnit and two-time best-selling author, and I'll be your guide throughout the series. Joining me is Dr. Mickey Fitzcollins, Learnit's top-ranked facilitator and a leadership expert dedicated to helping you grow. This series is brought to you in partnership with our good friends at MuchSkills, a platform that helps organizations map and understand their workforce capabilities. Drawing from insight from their survey of over 28,000 professionals, we'll unpack 11 skills in this weekly series that will prepare you to thrive in an ever-evolving world. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us share this message far and wide. Let's dive into today's top skill. So today we are talking about one of the most difficult things when it comes to being a leader. Maybe not ranked the most difficult, which a study has shown is difficult conversations, but delegation of what we're talking about today is super difficult, especially for new leaders. So let's just start off with, Mickey, give us the definition of delegation.
Yeah. For most people, I think the definition of delegation is fear, right? But really what we're talking about when we talk about delegation is, it's not about, I'm just going to give other people my work, or I'm going to give other people the busy work that I don't want to do, or anything like that. But really what we're talking about is empowering other people to act on your behalf while you still maintain the accountability for the work, right? And really it's about thinking, we've talked so many times through this series about value, right? The definition of delegation when it comes to value is, what can I delegate that's going to add the greatest level of value for me, for my team, and my organization? And I'm super excited, Damon, because as you know, we have a brand new workshop that we developed on delegation. And this came from so many people coming to us saying, I really need to build this skill. Can you please help me with this? And we have a great framework that we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it, man.
No, let's do it. So as we have for all these episodes, kick it off with the story on delegation.
What's interesting is this is actually recent that I was in one of our coaching skills workshops, and people were talking about, it's so challenging to learn how to delegate because, I think a lot of people have really bad examples of, having things delegated to them. And I shared with them that, I remembered having kind of similar challenges earlier on in my career. And I actually went the other direction. I went the direction of micromanaging, right? And what happened was I delegated something, but I was so focused in on it needs to be done this way, and I want to see updates, and I wanted this. I was creating just bottleneck after bottleneck after bottleneck. And what we know is that regardless of where people are, you mentioned this is a hard skill to learn early in the career. I think it's actually even harder for people once they have some seasoning on them, because we get so used to, this is the way that I do things. This is what I think is valuable. This is my style, whatever it is. And for me, I was so focused earlier on in my career on accelerating my career, right? Getting the titles, the accolades, all of that sort of stuff, that I failed to delegate nearly enough. And when I did, it was just a series of missteps with micromanagement. I was constantly asking people for updates. I wanted to see reviews, all of this sort of stuff. And almost every single one of the projects that I delegated just completely backfired on me. And I did the thing that most people do in delegation, which is then I just pulled everything back, right? I started hoarding everything. And that's exactly, we're going to talk about a framework here, Damon. We're going to talk about how to not do that, right? How to effectively delegate. But it was such, I can think so vividly of all of these times where, my goodness, did I do this wrong? And what I did was, not only was I creating a lack of value, I was creating a lack of trust and a negative work environment for the people on my team, all because I thought that I was doing the right thing.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And I've got so much on this topic, both from past experiences, and also this comes up almost 90% of the time on the podcast with great guests, where they talk about where they emphasize how important delegation is. One of the episodes with Jim Slexer, which I love, is he talks about, Mickey, reframing it instead of calling it delegation, where it kind of sounds like you're dumping something on the plate that maybe is not important to you, but is to reframe it as development. So this is something that the individual can learn from and grow from. And so that is super important. And also, like what you talked about is bottlenecking. We had Mr. Culture on the show, Chris Dyer, and both of these episodes will be in the show links. And he just talked about how his company couldn't scale because he had to review everything. He was the bottleneck. He was the problem. And what took him a long time to realize was that people had better answers for things. He'd say, "Well, this is how we've always done it," or "This is how I like to do it." And then once he realized that he had all this talent on his team, and you take people out of the box and give them the opportunity, his life became much better. And so there's
Yeah.
so many negatives about not delegating, right?
Yeah.
So, for all you leaders out there, I know it's difficult, but it is critical to delegate. So walk
Well,
us through, Mickey, the framework that you were talking about.
yeah, absolutely. And just a comment on that, Damon, the visualization I always have for people when they bring up the delegation stuff is, we have platters and huge buffet tables full of tasks and things that we should do and things that we ought to do, right? And we are only but one human, right? And so the delegation stuff is super important. And it's not just about getting the work done. It's not about doing more with less, doing more with more, sometimes doing things more smart, doing things in a more smart fashion. But really what we're talking about, yeah, is development. You have all these great people on your team. They need to build the skills. They need to have experiences. They need to be able to do this stuff in kind of a safe sort of environment. And that's under your leadership. That's with your leadership. Yeah. So let me this framework. And I love this framework that we came up with. It's called Delegation Greenlights, okay? And there's three components, three super important questions, really short questions for us to focus in on. The first one is should I, okay? And this is should I delegate, okay? So you have to ask yourself stuff like, is this confidential? Is this something that is strategic or kind of only at your level? Is it something that's only your job? Or is this something that's really going to help people on your team? It's kind of a checklist sort of thing, Damon, to kind of like, does this make sense? Because of course, what we don't want to do is we don't want to delegate something to somebody on our team that now we have to give them, access to maybe things that they shouldn't have access to. It's at a strategic level that maybe they're not privy to some of these other pieces, or it's confidential and they would get access to something that maybe they shouldn't have access to. Things that frankly are your job. You shouldn't be delegating those things, right? The second question, though, is can I? Okay, so if we answer the question, should I? Yes, 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 yes. All of this stuff sounds good. Then we move into the question of can I? Do I have the right people with the right skills? This is question number one, right? And I would actually put right kind of in air quotes because right skills, skills, as you know, I mean, this is the essence of everything that we do. Everyone's constantly learning. We're constantly in a place of rebuilding our skills. You and I were just talking the other day about skills kind of rebuilding every 6 months or so. And so the question of, do I have the right people with the right skills? The second question, and this is a big one that, just the other day I was meeting with some folks and talking about this. Do we have the time? Now, 99.9% of people are going to say, absolutely not. Nobody has enough time, right? But really, this comes down to how proactive are we going to be versus how reactive are we going to be? And then the third part of this, can I, is do they want to do it? Do I have somebody on my team that really wants to do this, right? Do they have the skills, but also do they have the passion? The third question to this framework, right? So should I, can I? If we're yes, 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 all the way through that, then we get into the, okay, how do I actually do this, right? And this is where we need to figure out, how do I select the person to delegate to, right? And this comes down to like a decision-making matrix, right? Maybe we need to look at skills, time, experience, growth capacity. What's currently on people's plate? Can we deprioritize some stuff to prioritize some other things? Then we need to talk about communicating clearly. This comes down to the big why, right? We were just talking about this the other day as well, as explaining the why, not just the what, but the why is actually much more important. What does success look like with this, right? And then doing pervasive helping. And I love this phrase, pervasive helping rather than micromanaging. The bottleneck stuff, the check-ins, all those difficult things we just talked about a bit ago. What we want to do is we want to be pervasively helping somebody, timing our help, clarifying our intentions of the help, and most importantly, giving help that's about substance over style, right? Style is about sprinkles on the ice cream, right? These don't actually matter. Although, I like to talk about it like, I think sprinkles on ice cream don't really matter. Now, my 3-year-old would say differently about that, right? But really, what we're talking about is substance, right? When I'm providing help, I want it to be substantive help, right? So, those are the 3 questions. Can I, should I, or starting first, pardon me, should I, can I, and then how do I?
So, Mickey, my question is, are there different levels of delegation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can delegate something that's a very small, like this needs to be done by the end of the day, this needs to be done by the end of the week. And then there's bigger projects, right? So I think about scope, right? It kind of gets me into this thinking about project management. If you're having somebody own an entire process, an entire project from start to finish, that's a very different than, hey, Mickey, I have these things that need to be summarized and synthesized by the end of the week. Could you go ahead and do that, right? Smaller sort of project. So I think scope is kind of a leveling concern or a thing to be aware of. I think also levels or different types of delegation has everything to do with impact to the organization or impact to your customers, right? You may delegate something to me that is minimal impact or impact that's internal only. You may delegate something to me that has massive impact externally to our customers, right? That leveling the stakes, right, much higher when we're talking about kind of the impact outside the organization. So those are the 2 pieces I think about: time and I think about impact.
No, great answer. And I was thinking about it. I went through Michael Hyatt, who I'm a huge fan of his work, and he's got books like Free to Focus. And in our cohorts that I went through, he talked about the different levels of delegation. And not to rephrase all of them, but there's certain things you can delegate and you just don't worry about, right? Because if things don't go well, no big deal. But also, if it has a major impact, you either don't delegate it at all, but if you do, you have different levels of check-ins. But it's also super important, again, like we talked about in the 3 steps, about you got to be crystal clear with timeline and goals around that. So there
Yeah.
are different levels of delegation, and and all of that's included. Now, oh, go ahead. You're gonna say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, when we delegate, something that's really important to keep in mind is as a leader, when we delegate something to somebody, we might be thinking kind of big picture, right? We might be thinking about outcome and kind of the 50,000-foot view of things. But when you delegate, this is where empathy is really important and kind of understanding other people's perspectives and experience. When you delegate something to somebody on your team, they're likely going to come at it from the boots on the ground perspective. They're going to want to know those details: by when, to what extent, what's the budget, how many people can I work with, et cetera, right? They're going to have a lot of that detail sort of question. And you're going to be thinking about the big picture. And I think one of those things, and this is why I talk about that proactive versus reactive, is to think about, and you mentioned kind of the stakes of something as well, to think about how much of this do I want to dictate process, or am I really just focused on outcome, right? We have to kind of think about those 2 pieces, because if I don't really if the goal is to get to whatever that outcome is, and the process, however you get there, no big deal, right? Then I'm not going to dictate those pieces. But if it's something where it's like, here's these different steps, that's those details, that level of detail that perhaps the person you're delegating to, they're going to have a ton of questions for you, right? So that's one of those things that we need to keep in mind when we delegate as well.
Yeah, I'm just gonna overemphasize the importance of being crystal clear. And on top of that, leaders, when you delegate stuff, have patience and take the time to make sure that you're sharing what they need. Exactly like you were saying, Mickey, here's the budget, here's the timeline. But this is also something that's very, very important that I think I've done a much better job at over the years. When I delegate something to somebody, I tell them why I'm delegating it and why it's important, no matter how small it is, right? And also, the learning opportunity they get from it, which I think is critical. Now, here's something that I've seen happen time and time again over the years, and I want to use my good friend Jose Castro, who worked at Learnit for 20 plus years, is that sometimes you have these top performers. Jose was like the go-to guy at Learnit. You knew if you handed something off to Jose, it would get done, on time, and it would be done perfectly. Now, the problem is too much got delegated to Jose,
Yeah.
and the poor guy never said anything about it. He just took it on over and over again to the point where he almost was working, like 12 hours a day. Which was a mistake that I made, making sure that I wasn't over delegating to Jose and everybody else on the team too. Was so how do you prevent that, and how do you help guard like a top performer like this so that doesn't happen?
Yeah, yeah, and that's a great question, and that actually came up when I was facilitating our delegation workshop the other day. Is like, what about those star performers? Everybody wants them on their team, their project, their committee, whatever it might be. I think the thing that's important is like back up all the way to the beginning to remember when you're delegating something to someone, this is not part of their everyday job, right? Like this is not part of their to-do list, their routine stuff that they're supposed to be doing. And so when you're delegating, that question of who's the right person and who has the right skills, super important, but time becomes incredibly important. And the thing that I think a lot of us don't want to hear, but we have to face the music around prioritization, right? And so when I'm delegating or I'm being delegated to, I just had this conversation with my supervisor the other day of like, okay, well, what do we deprioritize? What do we move the deadline out for so that I can prioritize this other thing? And again, having those open conversations, that's a sign of psychological safety in the organization. And as the leader, as the person who's doing that delegation, I need to be the one that kind of extends that branch first of I'd like to delegate this thing to you. I think you're fantastic for this. You have the skills, you're, blah, 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 whatever that might be, however you set that up. And let's talk about the other things that are on your plate that we can deprioritize or that we can move the timeline out. Maybe there's things that we have artificial internal timelines for that maybe we can, move that deadline out. The problem is exactly what you said is that sometimes our star performers, and I'm not saying that this was Jose's issue, but I've seen this before in folks that I've supervised, our star performers, they love that, right? Like, yeah, because these are resume builders. This is portfolio building. This is skill building. This is ascending in the leadership ranks of an organization to be able, I did these extra projects. People don't want to say no to that, but we have to, as the leaders, we have to be cognizant of, okay, this is like the fourth project that I've delegated to this person this month on top of their regular job. I can't expect somebody to come up, and especially when you're in a position of power, I can't expect that that person's going to be willing to say, "Hey, Mickey, this is too much," right? Like this is just too much right now. I have to be cognizant and aware of that stuff.
Great point. I got an example I want to share in a second, but it's also if you're creating a safe enough environment and feedback can go both ways. Hopefully, the team members feel open enough to say that if possible. Now, a lot of high performers won't because, like you said, it could be resume building, and if you're a great leader, people don't want to let you down anyways, right? And so you got to be cognizant of that. Now, a quick little example is we have Skylar on our team is awesome. And just yesterday, this new opportunity came up and I immediately wanted to add it to her plate. But I was at least smart enough to call her up, have a conversation and say, hey, I'd love for you to do this, but it's going to take about 40 hours. Please don't say yes until we could figure out what we could take off your plate, deprioritize, because if there's other things that are such a priority right now, then maybe we can shelf this until the time is available. Because sometimes leaders like me get super excited. We want to do everything. But fortunately, in this situation, Skylar's like, no, I could take this on. Here's this one thing I have to deprioritize. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't matter. Not that that doesn't matter, but we can actually shelf that for later. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. We actually talk about that in a couple of our time management workshops. Is essentially what you're talking about is saying no professionally, right? And saying yes professionally. One of the best skills that we can develop is the ability to say no or not right now. And when somebody's coming to us with to delegate, I always tell people the first thing I'm a big calendar blocker, and I know a lot of folks are, right, of kind of here's what's going on. Here's my appointments with other people, but here's the blocks of time that I'm going to be focused on these other priorities. when we can, what we want to do is not say yes or no right away before we take a look at what do I have going on, right? Like what's coming up here? What do I have on the priority list? And you and I have worked on a number of projects where I'm like, yeah, I'm really interested in this. And let me look at the other stuff that I have going on. It's not a yes, right? It's just a hang on a moment because I need to look at this and I need to figure out, is there wiggle room with some of that other stuff? And again, healthy environments, healthy organizations have supervisees and supervisors that can have those kind of two-way conversations. But it is a problem at times, right? Because people feel like I need to say yes, especially when it's, your supervisor, whatever that might be. And so building that culture of saying no professionally or saying not right now or let me get back to you, that's another huge part of delegation. Absolutely.
No, great point. And one thing I want to also add is healthy, great cultures. People are very clear, not just on what their roles and responsibilities and goals are, but if they have insights into what others' roles, responsibilities, and goals are, right? That is so important because before, if it's cross department, if you could look into seeing, okay, well, this is what Mickey's responsibilities. I mean, this is what her goals are. So maybe she's not the best fit for delegating this to, right? So hopefully when you do that, you're all, instead of working in a silo, you're kind of all working in the right direction. Now, we don't have time to go through this, but for those of you who are leaders or individual contributors, and, I had Ethan Evans on the show, and he had this phenomenal 5-step framework called the Magic Loop that you have to go back and check out. Because when it comes to delegation, it shouldn't always come from the leader to their team member. I think, unless you're the founder or owner, and you have a boss or a leader yourself, you should ask what can I take off your plate? What can you delegate to me? And so, like I said, we don't have time to go through that today, but please go back and check that out because that is a key thing that you can do to set yourself apart. Because trust me, not too often, and I've surveyed other leaders, not too often do people come to their boss and say, "Hey, what can I take off your plate? What can I make your life easier?" I just want to throw that out there.
It's the essence of managing up, Damon. That's what
Managing
you're
up.
talking about is managing up.
It's
Yeah.
managing up.
Fantastic workshop that we can, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully we cover that in our managing up
Mhm.
workshop. Great.
Absolutely, we do. Yeah.
So, to wrap things up, Mickey, can you go back through our 3-step process?
So, Damon, what we're talking about here is the Delegation Greenlights Framework, which has 3 very basic questions to it and some sub questions that are part of that. The first one is should I? Should I delegate it to somebody? Meaning, is this something that is private? Is it confidential? Is it at a strategic level that maybe that person is at, right? We don't want to delegate that stuff. Is it your job and your job only? We shouldn't delegate that. But does it help people on your team? Does it help develop them, right? We think about delegation as development. If the answer is yes, 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 then we move on to the second question, which is can I? Do I have the right people on my team? Do they have the right skills? Do we have the time? This is probably the most important element is do I have the time? Do they have the time? And then do they want to do it, right? Because we want to match people with projects and skills and tasks that are things that they're interested in developing. If we get to yes, 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 green light, green light, green light, then we get to the place of how do I? How do I actually delegate this? How do I select who I'm going to actually delegate this to? And this is really kind of a decision-making framework. Who has the skills? Who has the time? Who has the experience? Who's interested in this growth opportunity? And then as you talked about, super important that we communicate very clearly with that person. Why is this important? What does success look like? And we want to be able to engage in what we call pervasive helping. It is the exact opposite of micromanagement because once we delegate that to somebody, we want to be able to be a timed helper to that person and not be hovering over them and creating artificial bottlenecks. So that's our green lights framework. Super awesome stuff. Really helps people know exactly what we need to do to be more effective delegators.
Mickey, you know what's awesome?
What's that?
You're awesome.
Ha!
So
I
anyway,
love that.
so let's wrap it up. And to recap what we talked about, first of all, delegation is critical and it's one of the most difficult things for a leader to do. But if you don't delegate, you're going to create bottlenecks. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to stifle the growth of your team. Why have great people on your team if you're not able to delegate and give them opportunities to grow? And that's what I love about what we talked about, how Jim Slexer reframes it. Instead of delegation, you want to make it about development. Super important. Also, our 3 steps, or however you want to call it, of approach to what you should delegate, which Mickey just went through for us. There's so many great things here, everybody. So please think about it. And what I'm going to do is for the first 25, and it's only 25 people who ping Mickey or I on LinkedIn, or it's all in the show notes. We'll give you a free code to our delegation class. So take
That's
advantage
awesome.
of it. And until next time, everybody, stay curious and keep learning. Have a great day. I really believe that learning agility could be the #1 most important skill for today and in the future.
The organizations that are successful these days are the ones that are investing in their learning from the top all the way down to the bottom. Our worlds and our ways of operating and our ways of doing business are rapidly changing. And so if we're not learning, if we're not keeping up with that, if we're not adapting, our businesses are over with.